When I talk about that art has to behave more like film, I'm also coming from this that film is a much more open medium.
Well, right. I mean, that's actually what I was getting at with the idea that there's less, interestingly, like there's some ownership, but less immediate criticality because there's some sense that this is within a world that it belongs to them. And that's something I've always been interested in with respect to film and both how it functions as production, but how it's received as audience. And I think that, is something very different than the way in which people engage art in a gallery, which of course I do actually believe in and want to work with and continue to, but, sort of balancing those two approaches is very fundamentally context for how similar work can be understood and engaged, that's the context.
Film from day one has had absolutely no problem with its identity as art and not. I think that's a highly productive mode. And when I talk about film, it's something that's important for people to think about what they do. It's really more like how do you sort of expand and actually talk and sort of produce and invent ways for these motions that people like us called artists do, so that they're not just for each other. They actually might land in the real world in some way.
Yeah, right.
Because that's something I've never had any stomach for in academia.
Again, from a structural point of view, it's an interesting way that you've translated a lot of that thinking into this museum show, and I really commend both you and Rachel for finding a way to bring that sensibility and that way of thinking into the museum context, because I know certainly how difficult that can be. The one last thing is a very literal question, just how you construct your timeline. I've just always been interested in what were your markers and how you decided on those. I know you picked particular events, particular moments, as I understand it, in the mapping of the narrative.
Yeah. The beginning is sort of arbitrary. The beginning is sort of when I stopped throwing my work away. When you first make work as an artist and you're a student, it's like you move from shitty apartment to shitty apartment. You throw what you like, you keep what you want, and then you throw everything away. And then when you make sculpture, you throw all of it. After there's nothing. So first, it starts with work that I felt had sort of begun to kind of be able to kind of drive itself in a serious way. The pinhole cameras for me were the first works of that, where I felt like I had sort of a big machine for reflexivity that you could sort of throw a lot of different problems into. For me, that's sort of my first work that I took seriously. Somebody who could really kind of use my formation, my education as an artist to kind of look at the problems that were interesting to me in my life. So we begin with those, and then it goes, and then it starts to change, and then it just goes, and then one of the, we're basically just using the Google timeline to kind of handpick different events that happened in LA.
Right.
That I remember, and we all remember in the studio. And it's like, because I thought it would be interesting to sort of have kind of a series of short articles about the day-to-day, the things, kind of the larger stories, the smaller stories that were happening, and that you present that in Ireland, and it's not really, you can't connect with it in the same way that I connect with it. So there's a kind of an obvious dissonance between wanting to show somebody part of yourself, but really not giving them access to what the kind of more deeper relationship to that is, which is one's relationship to living in a place or being in a city or something. I was very interested in that kind of dynamic and that kind of information, but it's like it is so specific that it's almost impossible to translate. And what you're left with at the end is a meta discussion about that. So and then there's we asked a bunch of people to send us photographs of the last 20 years. So, when I was at an exhibition, galleries, blah blah blah, friends, things that all relate to work, and we haven't gotten a lot of them. But we'll see. So there's a timeline that runs that are these photographs that run that way also.
I would like to thank Shamin, and on that note too, I'd like to add a summary and thank so far our three speakers of Shumon, Alex and Shamin. For this catalogue is really challenging the boundaries and conventions of what a format of a catalogue should be. And this Skype session, we're trying to break down the formal structures, conventions of a catalogue and what a book is in the 21st century. Using the formal structures and the conventions of what a catalogue should be, Pardo has thrown down the gauntlet to the generation of artists that do not shirk responsibility of engaging with technology and to assimilate and, I think importantly, personalize that experience. I would like to thank Jorge as well for his candid and very honest responses and replies, as this hasn't been edited, and this is very much an embodiment of the author and the kind of resulting Skype, five-way actually, conference Skype sessions. I also want to thank the editor, IMMA, for bringing a very much a personal and inspiring approach to this experiment, which I think has gone very well for us here at the Irish Museum of Modern Art. The writers here, which have questioned and engaged with Jorge, have actually, this information is actually taking us to look at the role of public space with the art, internet, and importantly, the institution. So I'd like to thank them and look at that shift and also the practice of inversion here, that we are engaging with the concept of the exhibition both within and without the walls of the normal space. This brings us very neatly to the fifth response from Irvin Sandler. Irvin Sandler is an art critic and historian and professor at the State University of New York and former president and board member of the American section of the International Art Critics Association. He was director of the Newburgh Museum of Art and co-founder of Artist Space Gallery and author of many books such as The Triumph of American Painting, A History of Abstract Expressionism, The New York School, Painters and Sculptors in the 1950s, American Art of the 1960s, and also A Sweeper Up After Artists, a memoir. In 2008, he received the Lifetime Achievement Award in Art Criticism from the American section of ICA. And I think it's a really good note that Irvin will do an afterword, I think, engaging of the 21st century, of what that notion is from a critic's point of view, and a critic's point of view engaging with the artist Jorge Pardo. So I'd like to thank everybody today as we go forth to the summation and afterword by Irvin Sandler. Thank you, Irvin.
I should like to consider Jorge Pardo in the larger context of 20th century art. He emerged at a critical juncture in its history, that is, in the 1980s, at the point where modernist or avant-garde art turned into postmodernist art. As I will show, Pardo used this critical point as the pivot about which to develop his art and about which he continues to develop it. But first I need to define modernist or avant-garde art on the one hand, and on the other, postmodernist art. The modernist era witnessed a progression of new and original styles emerging one after the other, each coming into view, becoming established, and then becoming dated. Value in art depended in large measure on originality and novelty. Make it new was the avant-garde rallying cry. What had been done was not worth redoing. But how was art to be made new? By pressing to its limits, the edge where it could be taken for non-art. Indeed, generations of artists had systematically demolished every notion of what art should be, to the extent that they eliminated what had been accepted generally as the irreducible conventions of art, that it be an object, visible, and differentiated from the everyday environment. However, pressing to the limits has become so familiar that Harold Rosenberg could characterize it as a tradition of the new. Moreover, it appears today that all of the limits are known, as are all artistic options. And, as a tradition, pressing to the limits has become so commonplace that even if artists could still discover new limits, their claims to be truly avant-garde would be dismissed with a raised eyebrow.